Brian didn't want you to shoot, but you shot it anyway.
For sure.
You guys have butted heads before.
Yeah. It's more about defense, though. It's never about a shot.
Is it like?
Yeah.
That's how Brian. That's how Brian can play. What's wrong, Brian? Guess we all don't want to win. What? We play cards and you beat Brian in the hand. He just, I work hard every day. What? Cards. I work hard every day. I get up. I'm in the gym. I dedicate myself. What the are you talking about, Brian? Just say guts or no guts, man. Everything don't require a winning speech. God damn.
What's going on, guys? This is the Ball Don't Lie podcast here on Penn State Sports Night, episode 28. We're creeping up on 30, so that's pretty exciting. There's a lot going on in the NBA. There's a lot of news regarding the season, a lot of news, of course, regarding the draft, and even a lot of rumors twirling right now. So we're going to get all into it right here, right now. But let's talk about the biggest question, elephant in the room, and that's when's the season going to start? And now we know it's officially going to be December 22nd, a 72-game season. That's what it's going to be. And then regarding some of the off-season programs, free agency is going to begin on November 20th, and signings will be allowed November 22nd at 12:01 p.m. The draft is November 18th, Matt. So next week and the week after is going to be quite busy.
Yeah, I mean, is training camp still set to begin on December 1st?
It didn't say so in the agreement that the NBA and NBPA, the Players Association, but I'm figuring it is going to be around then, given that that makes sense for a legitimate timetable.
Yeah, that just seems like a quick turnaround for free agents and rookies because, obviously rookies will usually have their own rookie camp to get kind of acclimated before the vets get there. And I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that this year. And, and another question, are they still going to do that 2-week break in the middle of the season that they were talking about? Because if so, that seems like the most logical place for makeup games we play that are canceled by COVID, right?
Yeah, we've been seeing, even in college basketball, that a lot of these conferences are actually allocating a week solely for makeup games. So that would make a lot of sense, Matt. I mean, their games are probably gonna be canceled or postponed. We've seen it in every single sport, other than the NBA, because they play in the bubble, and they're not going to be playing in the bubble this year. Like, that's not going to happen again. Maybe they'll do something for the playoffs if it comes to it, but not for a whole season, not for 72 games and all 30 teams. That's just unrealistic. But I'm very curious to see how the NBA does navigate all of this, because this is a very different year. And I forgot to say this, but we are locked out of the studio yet again. So we are on strike. Nah, just kidding. But we are locked out. Anyways, though, yeah, I think that this was inevitable. I know that a lot of the veteran players and the players that played longer into the season, last season, are not happy with it, but it is what it is. The NBA is a business, and they got to make money.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's always what's going to be. It's always going to be what it comes down to is just the money, the almighty dollar, and they're trying to keep their schedule kind of sort of normal. Starting at, December, which is like 2 months after they would usually start. I guess they're trying to get the playoffs done before the Olympics, like we talked about last week, before August. I hope it can be done, but I am cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think, the season, will progress like all these other leagues have. So I'm not really too concerned with that. I'm curious to see what some of these safety protocols are going to be, maybe what can and players can't do, and coaches and stuff like that. I'm very curious to see practices. Maybe there's less practices. Maybe they're not as long. Maybe it's not full team practices. I'm not really quite sure. You can't really split it up by position like you can maybe in the MLB or in the NHL or the NFL, because, yes, there's positions in basketball, but there's not too. But it's less people, so maybe that's also possible. But also, you made a good point, Matt. For these rookies, this is probably the hardest year to be entering the NBA for any rookie, because there's no summer league. The preseason is not going to be as long. You're going to get thrown right into the fire. So I wonder if that's going to change maybe how some of these teams approach the draft. Maybe they draft guys who are a little more, veteran savvy, were juniors, seniors, in college rather than these freshmen who they think can make a bigger impact right away than guys who they may have to wait on for a while.
Yeah, Hunter, you brought up a good point, too. I totally forgot about the summer league and preseason and stuff like that. These rookies are pretty much going to get thrown right into the fire here.
Yeah, so
that's going to be problematic. That's going to be an issue. We're going to see some bad basketball.
Yeah, we may. It may be a bit of a bigger learning curve than it normally is. I also don't know what the whole situation is with the G League as well. If they're going to be having a season, if they're going to be playing maybe less games, they're not traveling as much. I think that'll be sorted out at some point. I can't imagine them not having a G League season.
Right.
But I also think that's some food for thought, too, there.
Yeah, I mean, well, you saw in the MLB, the minors didn't have a season this year, and they were without it. They kind of had, like, their own training facility, their own training site. They didn't, obviously they didn't play games, but they kept their minor leaguers ready in case they wanted to bring them up. Maybe we'll see some similar to that with the G League where they just have practices and stuff in an off-campus site, but not necessarily playing games.
Yeah, some definitely good points to bring up, Matt, because there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty entering the bubble, of course, but we saw how that played out. This is a whole nother beast, and I'm sure the NBA will figure out something. But some news that made the rundown right before we got on air is the head coaching spot for the Oklahoma City Thunder is now filled. Mark Daigneault, I really hope I pronounced that right. I think so, but he is now the new head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder. He was an assistant coach last year. They brought him up, so they hired in-house there. Only 35 years old, so one of the younger coaches in the NBA. He spent 5 seasons as the Oklahoma City Blue. That's a G League team, the team that found the diamond in the rough, Alex Caruso. But he was the head coach there for 5 seasons, went 143 to 107. His record led him to the playoffs 4 times in those 5-year stint. Became an assistant coach under Billy Donovan last year, which is funny because he actually served 4 years under him as an assistant at Florida. And that's where Billy Donovan was before he took the Thunder job. And then from 2003 to 2007, served as a student manager under Jim Calhoun at UConn. So, Matt, he's been around some great head coaches and some great teams, and he's won everywhere he's gone. He's a younger head coach. So the Thunder basically rolling the dice here. What kind of message do you think this sends?
Well, I think it sends the message that they're not keen on getting a guy that's going to be, all right, let's be competitive now, and they're going to see what they have in this guy. Maybe they found a diamond in the rough, and obviously they're looking to rebuild. They're trying to trade Chris Paul pretty actively right now. They're going to have a young roster. They're going to have a lot of first and second round picks over the next couple of years from the Clippers and that Paul George deal. So I think it's a safe move for them because they're not looking to compete right away and right now. And I think this is just continuing the trend of G League coaches that went from being an assistant to now being promoted to head coach. I think it's the 3rd team that's done that so far. I know Indiana did it. And it will be interesting to see what kind of roster you will have to work with, as I brought up, and what he's able to do with it, because, the roster may end up looking pretty similar to the G League roster he coached for the Oklahoma City Blue.
Yeah, it potentially could. But they must really like him, because I figured a guy like him would be someone that would follow Billy Donovan to Chicago, given their long history that they have together. But the Thunder definitely liked him enough to keep him around and promote him as a head coach, despite him. Obviously, he has head coaching experience. We've seen it. But he's a lot younger, and it's a younger hire. Maybe he's got some ideas that we don't know about. And maybe the Thunder, for the 2nd year in a row, are better than maybe people are projecting.
Yeah, I just think, if they trade Chris Paul, which they probably will end up doing, I don't think they're going to be very competitive, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and we'll get into some more Chris Paul rumors as we talk throughout this podcast, because they are swirling right now. There's a lot of rumors flying around everywhere. So don't worry, we'll get into all that beefy stuff. But looking at 2 former Oklahoma City Thunder men, I guess, James Harden and Russell Westbrook, they are teammates yet again, of course, but now with the Houston Rockets. Apparently, there's some speculation that they're expressing concern over Houston's future. No trade requests have been made. That being said, though, you have the Knicks and the Clippers apparently eyeing Russell Westbrook and potentially willing to make a move for him. And then also, too, the Rockets added Jeff Hornacek as an assistant coach. But let's start off with the original point I made here. Should they be worried about the future of this Houston organization?
It's tough to say because obviously they didn't perform the way they wanted to this year. The whole no center thing really didn't work out. I think they should be concerned. But I think they're also looking to probably build around them. And obviously with a new coach, new GM, both D'Antoni and Daryl Morey leaving, I think they're kind of questioning the direction a little bit, questioning the commitment from the organization as a whole. But I honestly think that them starting over was probably good and probably necessary for them to really take that next step, because it wasn't work with D'Antoni. Daryl Morey needed to move on. Will Westbrook be traded? I don't know. I doubt it, but it'd be interesting to see what kind of return they would get from him if they did end up trading him.
Yeah, I think they should start to feel worried if they start moving guys like Robert Covington, Eric Gordon. They start moving PJ Tucker, guys like that. And the reason why I say that is because when you start moving players like that, it's hinting at something. Right now, it doesn't look like any of those guys are going anywhere. But if they start trading some of those guys for draft picks, then I think you can start looking at, okay, maybe this organization is not trying to win now. I don't think that's the case, nor do I think it should be. I think, if anything, they should reload rather than rebuild, because you have two of the star basketball players in the entire world on your team. And it'd be stupid to completely regut this roster when you have this. And I think their window to compete is still open, at least for this year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely still open. And as you said, with those role players, if they start shipping those guys out, then probably hit the panic button if I'm James Harden or Westbrook. But you bring up the Knicks and Clippers here being attached to Westbrook. The Clippers would be an interesting fit just because of the schematic fit on that team. I don't know if he necessarily fits that squad. And also, it would be funny to see him and Paul George together again after they did nothing in Oklahoma City together. And then as far as the Knicks goes, I think if he got traded to the Knicks and the Knicks were able to snag Fred VanVleet in free agency, that would be an interesting pairing given VanVleet's efficient catch and shooting ability. Call me crazy, but that Knicks team might mess around and win 30 games.
Oh, boy. Man, we are really just linking Fred VanVleet to the Knicks. We are banking on the fact that they are just going to break the bank on Fred VanVleet and make him a max contract player.
We're going to offer him so much money. I can't wait.
I just love how we're talking as if that's like a lock at this point. But, okay, yeah, looking at both these teams, I guess we'll look at the Clippers first. It depends what they give up to get him. Because you're already paying Paul George and Kawhi Leonard max dollars, and Russell Westbrook's pay grade is right around those guys. I don't think Paul George and Russell Westbrook, I believe they got along. They individually played off each other fairly well, but neither of them showed up in the playoffs. I think Westbrook, from a mentality standpoint, makes a ton of sense because he plays hard, and I think that team just kind of lacked heart last year and grit and hustle, and Westbrook can provide that. Now, him being the third option on a team, I think that's a little interesting. I don't know if he's willing to give up all those shots because even though he's second fiddle to Harden, he still gets a lot of shots up. So he doesn't really have to complain much there. Being the third guy, that's new territory for Russell Westbrook. We've never seen him really be that third guy really anywhere. But I'm really kind of curious to see what the Clippers would give up for him. Looking at the Knicks, though, again, it's kind of the same thing when we talk about, do you make a move for Oladipo? Do you make a move for Chris Paul? It's the same thing. And you can look at it either way. The one question would be, what do you give up to get him? And also, is it worth it? Now, I wouldn't give up the entire farm. I think out of those three guys, you probably have to give up the most actually to get Westbrook. Those three guys I mentioned, due to age and contract. And that's why I get a little bit hesitant because we've seen you can't really build a championship team around Westbrook. And if they have to give up the 8th pick to get him, I'm just not quite sure that's necessarily worth it.
I don't think so either, as is the case with pretty much every trade we've talked about with the Knicks this offseason. It just doesn't seem worth it in terms of expediting their rebuild. They don't have a great draft pick this year. They're probably not going to get a generational talent at the 8th slot if they keep that pick. And I also don't think that Westbrook makes them that much better. He'll make them better, make them more competitive for sure, but I don't think he's enough to really put them over the hump and get them to the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Based on their current construction of the roster, maybe they can try to get another guy there as well. Then I think you're starting to build something. But if you're talking about just solely Russell Westbrook, I agree. I don't think he necessarily takes you to the playoffs. That next team is pretty bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, Houston is in an interesting spot nevertheless. And speaking about the Knicks, 3 employees got COVID, and they had to shut down the Madison Square Garden Training Center for the time being. Now, Of course, everyone's been getting, so many people are getting COVID. This isn't like news. However, though, I wonder how strict they're going to be in terms of like employees and stuff. Because these weren't even players. These are just employees. I don't know what their status was, but I just wonder like how the NBA is going to operate that in terms of like how many people are allowed to practice at the same time, stuff like that. And what qualifies as a team potentially having to postpone a game or something like that in terms of how close to contact they come in with certain people.
Yeah, I think the NBA is probably going to be the most cautious out of any sport we've seen, probably. MLB, we saw in the beginning, they were a crapshoot. The NFL is all over the place right now. And, the NBA was really the only league that really set the precedent in terms of getting things done with COVID and being really cautious about it. And I'm sure, even without the bubble this year, I think there's still going to be – Adam Silver is still going to be really, really aware and really strict about it. And I think the players understand that there's a mutual respect there. So I hope that, again, I'm cautiously optimistic about, the way this season's going to go. But I think Silver will be pretty strict. And I think, I think the players will take it seriously too, hopefully.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting just because, like, it doesn't sound like these employees were, like, super close to the team. But I think I just wonder, like, just how they're going to go about in terms of the contact situation, who people are allowed to see and things like that, because every league's got their guidelines. I'm curious to see what the NBA is going to lay out for their players, their coaches, and employees. But looking ahead now, let's talk about a funny comment that a former Knicks GM made. That's Isaiah Thomas. I mean, that's a nice transition there, isn't it? But he said that, quote, head-to-head, I was just dominant over him. He wasn't my competition. My focus was Bird, Magic, Dr. J, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And, of course, if you know Isaiah Thomas, he is talking about Michael Jordan. Now, Matt, we didn't live through this era. We didn't see it firsthand, per se. But we're both basketball historians enough that we know that this beef goes back all the way to before we were even born. Do you think Isaiah has a point here, or do you think he's just tripping and player hating?
Well, I mean, like you said, with us being historians of the game, I guess, I watched the Bad Boys documentary that ESPN put out. I obviously watched The Last Dance. There was a lot about Isaiah Thomas and Michael Jordan's disrespect for each other in there. And I think, this comment is it's just the epitome of him and MJ's dislike for each other. I will say that Isaiah probably was concerned with Jordan during that time, just not the rest of the Bulls. When the Pistons were highly competitive in the late 80s and into 1990, the Bulls just weren't there yet. And so I think in that respect, he might have a point in terms of the Celtics were still really good. The Lakers were still in their prime. The Sixers were probably on the tail end of that. I think he was probably more concerned with them. But to say he was dominant over Jordan is a bit questionable. Maybe the Bulls, but not Jordan.
Yeah, I think that's kind of there's two sides of the coin here. One hand, I do think he has a point, just based on since he's older than Michael Jordan. At the time, the Celtics, the Lakers, the Sixers were bigger threats to the Pistons, and the Pistons were beating up on the Bulls, and we saw that. The Bulls just didn't have an answer for that Pistons defense, and they couldn't really get Michael Jordan the shots he wanted. But when Michael Jordan finally beat him and took down the Pistons, it was over. That dynasty shattered from there. And you can argue Isaiah Thomas had all the injuries, age, all that's pretty much true. But you can't forget, like, Michael Jordan, this is clearly a shot at him. He knows what he's doing. He's been pestering him for basically as long as we've known it. And Isaiah Thomas, no surprise, he's not the biggest fan of Michael, his airness, Jordan.
Yeah, and he said the reason that he wasn't competitive with MJ in the 91 Eastern Conference Finals is because of hand surgery he had that year, which seems like an oddly convenient excuse to me, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I definitely would say an oddly convenient excuse. But let's talk about this. The Sacramento Kings and your Philadelphia 76ers, they got some new jerseys, new city jerseys. I always like these jerseys because whoever designs them gets really creative. They always have some kind of cool theme to them. But, Matt, I'll only ask you, a resident Sixer fan here, wearing your Sixers shirt, what do you think about them? You like them?
We have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok, and flat out deceived, Hunter. I thought the Sixers were going back to the '01 black jerseys, and they've released this jersey with a friggin' Boathouse Row skyline. I mean, I'm sure they'll grow on me, but right now I'm just mad that they're not the old Johns because they were marketing the '01 jerseys so hard. Like they were like, Allen Iverson's gonna be a part of this shoot, and they like changed their social media logo to be black. And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. Like they're gonna bring it back. And then I'm so hurt. I feel so let on.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think the jerseys aren't that bad, but
No, I mean they'll grow on me, but I just wanted the old Johns.
Yeah, I get it. The expectation versus reality was not there. I like the Kings ones. I thought those were pretty cool too.
I can't respect the Kings ones. They just say freaking Sacktown on them. That looks ridiculous.
Sacktown. But all right, so let's talk about something here, a little more of a serious manner. Let's talk about Sterling Brown. And if you weren't familiar with this situation, back in January of 2018, there was a bit of an altercation outside of a Walgreens. Basically, Sterling Brown parked in a double handicap spot, got into it a bit with the police, and they ended up tasing him. This was actually recorded, and it went public. And so Milwaukee, the city, had a big mess to clean up. And it seems like we're starting to see at least the end of this civil lawsuit. They settled for $750,000. That's how much Sterling Brown got from the city of Milwaukee for his civil rights lawsuit against the police. He filed it because he accused the police officers of using excessive force and carrying out racially motivated unlawful arrest. And the city will admit to a, quote, constitutional violation and will, quote, commit to incorporate changes to the Milwaukee Police Department's standard operating procedures. Now, there's been a lot of turmoil regarding the race relations between the Milwaukee Police Office and its citizens. Sterling Brown was no different, even though, of course, he's a relatively famous NBA player. Maybe not across everybody, but at least in Milwaukee, I'm sure a lot of people know who he is. And we saw what happened to Eric Blake. I hope I'm saying that right. So, and of course, we saw the protests and stuff like that. So, not only were the Bucks, but this city was super deeply affected by some of the things that have happened over the last couple of years. But I guess, you know, you can make whatever opinions you want on this. The video's out there itself, but I'm glad to see that justice was served.
Yeah, me too, Hunter. And, you know, if you look back and remember back to the strike that happened in the bubble, Sterling Brown was at the forefront of that. He was the player that did most of the talking when the Bucks held that press conference outside of their locker room after they had, held that strike with their game against the Magic. And I think this was part of the reason why is that he realized that this is so much bigger than, everything. This is so much bigger than basketball. And, he saw that, if he, an NBA player, as you brought up, who's someone who's relatively recognizable, is still getting treated like this, it's time to take a stand and use his platform as an NBA player to really shed light on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it made sense that Sterling Brown and other guys were the ones speaking out against it. And at the Bucks, it showed that because of how effective they've been, the city and I guess the team too, through treatment like this, that that they were the ones to initiate the strike and spark a movement that I never really thought I'd see in sports. So I gotta give them a lot of props there. But I will say though, and I think it's unfortunate, not to get too involved in this, that Sterling Brown, obviously, he got a lot of money, and I hope it's put to good use. But I do think, unfortunately, that not as many people get lucky, and I think that it doesn't matter what your job is or what your notoriety is. You shouldn't get treated differently or get compensated differently based on your likeness. And I think that's kind of because I just think if someone was in the same situation and didn't have the same name, they wouldn't get the same compensation. And that's, at the end of the day, just not fair.
I 100% agree with you, Hunter. I think, we've seen stories like this pop up in the past where I think it was Maurice Harkless when he was with Portland. I think he got pulled over on the way to a game and a cop racially profiled him and stopped him and was pretty much yelling at him in his car until Harkless handed him his ID. And then the cop realized who he was and was like, oh, crap. And then I think he was like, oh, can I give you a police escort to the game or something? And Harkless was like, no.
Yeah.
And that was the end of that. So I like you said, it's not always, people aren't always or usually that lucky when racial profiling happens like that, where they're immediately recognized, and something like that could end up poorly, even if they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. And yeah, not to get too politically motivated here on Ball Don't Lie, but at the end of the day, we promote equality and all that fun stuff. But last but not least, we unfortunately had a passing in the NBA community, and this was a big one. Tommy Heinsohn passed at the age of 86, a true Celtics legend through every single aspect of it. He was the first overall pick in the draft, spent 9 seasons with the Celtics, averaged 18.6 points per game and 8.8 rebounds, won 8, and you heard that right, 8 NBA titles with the team, 6 All-Star appearances, 4 times All-NBA second team, became the head coach in 1969, won 27 games with only 263 losses in his 9th season. 2 NBA championships came of that in 1974 and 1976. Made the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1986 as a player, and then made it as a head coach in 2015. Only a handful of guys have ever done that. And most recently, he was a color commentator for the Boston Celtics. So this guy lived the life of Boston. He embraced the city, bled green, and, I'm glad he lived a long life and was respected while he was here.
Yeah, obviously a big loss for the NBA, which seems like, a long list at this point of big losses for the NBA this year. But I saw some clips of his commentating career this morning on Twitter, and man, he was pretty funny as a color guy. He was a homer for sure, but man, did he provide some entertainment. Say what you will about, effective broadcast in this day and age, but at the end of the day, it's an entertainment business, and he made a seemingly seamless transition from coaching to the broadcasting booth.
Yeah, I wore a lot of different hats and thrived at pretty much all of them. So got to give credit, a big influence in the Boston community and just the NBA in general. But that's going to wrap up our Around the Association. Next up, we got our Players of the Week. Again, no games to base it off of, more so just kind of themes that we have on our lists. So, Matt, I'm curious to see what your theme is this week because you get pretty creative with this. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, not as charged of a motivation this week. It's just players on players on each team that has a top 3 pick. So I'm going to start off with Minnesota Timberwolves. These aren't like big name players. These are just players that intrigue me, quite honestly. So starting with Minnesota, I got Jarrett Culver. We talked about him a little bit last week. Culver's stats, they don't jump off the page this past season, as he only started about half of the games he played in for a truly horrid Wolves team. But he was the lone bright spot they had on the defensive end of the floor for a truly awful defensive team. If he can improve his offensive output, similar to what he did at Texas Tech when he led them in the national championship against Virginia in 2018, I think he'd become a very good role player for them.
That's a great name to bring up because I was a big Jarrett Culver fan coming out of the draft. And at the time, I used to write for NBADraft.net, and I covered the Big 12. So I followed Jarrett Culver's path to college stardom pretty closely. And I was really impressed with his game. It reminded me a little bit of a DeMar DeRozan, Jimmy Butler-esque kind of prospect coming out where similar game offensively to a guy like DeRozan, and you hope that he was able to extend that three-point shot. And then defensively, Jimmy Butler, just all up in your face defense. And that's kind of – he's always said that is what he thrives himself on, his defense. And I think the Timberwolves felt confident trading Covington. Not that he's as good of a player yet, but they like the promise and the potential of Jarrett Culver. Defensively, he was great last year. Probably one of the best rookies in the NBA in terms of on-ball defense and getting up in people's face. He's 6'6", 6'7", not the most explosive athlete, but very smart, knows angles, knows how to get the ball, to get his hands on the ball. Very savvy defensive player. And you just hope the offense can catch up too. And you can wait if you're Minnesota because you have Karl-Anthony Towns, who's an offensive machine. D'Angelo Russell, offensive machine. The guy you're going to take first overall is probably going to be able to get you some buckets too if they don't trade that pick. So they can afford that because I think that Jarrett Culver is the perfect player for what they currently have so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think only playing around alongside those great scorers like that is only going to improve his offensive game. And if he can drag them along on defense, they'll be much better. Yeah.
So my list is guys who I think have something to prove next season. Some guys who I think that had maybe good seasons, maybe even great seasons, but I think that we need to see just a little bit more out of them. The first one hits home for both of us. One, because you are a Philadelphia Sixer fan, and two, because, I'm from the Suffolk County 631. That's Tobias Harris.
Okay.
Statistically, had a pretty good season last year. The numbers back it up. But with no Ben Simmons, it seemed like Joel Embiid was by himself out there. And we talked about that in that first round of the series. Maybe Tobias Harris wouldn't have won it for them if he played great. But I think you need to see more out of him because they're paying him superstar money. They're paying him like he is a all-star, perennial all-star. He needs to play better. He needs to be, rise up to the occasion and play bigger in some of those big moments. I think that's the next step in Tobias Harris's progression for the Sixers.
Yeah, Hunter, you're not wrong. I know. $180 million, $36 million a year, a lot of money to pay a guy who's never made an all-star team. When you pay a guy that much money, you have lofty expectations for him, and he clearly has not met them through 1 year of his contract. He was a ghost in the playoffs last year. It was extremely frustrating to watch him take jump shots that were just brick after brick. He couldn't hit a three to save his life. His defense was poor in the playoffs. Everything about him was poor in the playoffs. He played decent in the regular season, but he needs to be more consistent. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where it is. He's got all the talent. He's got the work ethic. He's got the heart. The team loves him. He's one of the leaders of the team. Now he's got to have to see all that translate onto the basketball court, especially in those playoff series that the Sixers will probably inevitably be in next season. Maybe having Doc Rivers there where he had his best season as a player will help, but we'll see. So, Matt, obviously you're going to be talking about a Golden State Warriors player here, according to your list. I wonder who that guy is.
My guy is Eric Pascal. He was the former Nova Wildcat and national champion. He was one of the lone bright spots for a Warriors team that struggled mightily without their stars last year. He ended up on the all-rookie team while averaging 14 points per game on 50% shooting. I want to see how the Warriors use him when they have a full lineup because he definitely deserves to have some kind of role, maybe Draymond's backup or maybe even his eventual replacement if Draymond Green has another poor season like he did this year.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm all with that with the replacement thing, but I do like Eric Pascal. He was a guy who went in the second round. The Warriors, I think, got a steal for him because he was all rookie. Part of that could be, yes, his numbers were probably inflated because someone needed to shoot the ball with all those guys out. But he proved that he's a good player, and he was one of the only guys on that team last year that I was watching. Like, I think that's a guy who they keep around for the future. Right. I think he can serve as a good role player off the bench who can knock down shots, can guard multiple positions on defense, and that's kind of what the Warriors need right now because a lot of people want to elevate them as they're going to be going head-to-head with the Lakers and the Clippers. I'm not so sold yet. I think they got to make some moves. I really do. And I think one of the only guys off that second unit that I'm actually confident in next season is Eric Pascal. So I'm glad you brought him up.
Thank you. I do my best. And he's kind of a homer pick, too, because of Villanova connection all there. So
yeah. Were you a Nova fan growing up or no?
I'm a pretty big Nova fan. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a huge loyal to one team for college basketball. I just kind of love college basketball in general, but I will root for Nova.
I actually did not know that about you. The more you know, I guess. But next pick here, I'm going to be talking about a guy who I watched in college and is probably one of my favorite players I've ever watched play basketball. Has some pretty hot takes off the court, but that's Kyrie Irving. Now, last year, when he was playing, was an MVP candidate. The guy was playing that well. Now, this year, he's got Kevin Durant there. The Nets now we're talking about as a championship contending team. They made all these moves in the offseason in the coaching staff. There could be some moves in free agency, whether that's trading guys, whether it's signing some more guys, whatever the case may be. But they are reloading to compete for it all this year. And Kyrie Irving has to be that guy that we saw in Cleveland where to be that other guy who can hit big-time shots. And let's see if he can stay healthy and back up the big talk that he's been having since he got there in Brooklyn.
Yeah, Kyrie's kind of one of those guys that it seems like he's always saying something. You're like, what? But there's no question about his talent on the court. He just got to stay healthy. And, I think him and Kevin Durant obviously have a good relationship off the court. Hopefully it translates on court too because they're both going to want their touches. Yeah,
and I think it will because they both decided, let's go play together. You know what I mean? So it's almost like a partnership, if you will. And usually things go well when it's like that. When, if it's like a case where it went well in Cleveland. They won a championship, but he didn't ask for LeBron to get there. Like the Cavs just did it. Really, just LeBron wanted to be there, so they did it. But, it was one of those things where they saw they mutually agreed to do this. So and we saw Kyrie again play off of a big-time scorer in LeBron, although he's, obviously, a great passer as well. But Kevin Durant's a good passer in his own right. But we also saw Kevin Durant play well off of guys like Westbrook and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. So both these guys have shown the ability to play off of other great scorers. So I think it will work out in that sense. At the end of the day, we were allowed to have multiple great scorers on the court and multiple guys that can hit shots, big-time shots at the end of the game.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how they gel, and I'm excited to see them play. I'm excited to see Durant play too. I haven't seen him play in 2 years, and it's going to be interesting to see that fit and interesting to see how well they are playing together.
Yeah, I think they're probably the most intriguing team entering the season because I have no idea how they're going to look.
Yeah.
But last but not least, Matt, third overall pick is the Charlotte Hornets. So I'm very curious to see who you're talking about on that team.
He's probably the most recognizable name on this team. It's Devontae Graham. We brought him up a little bit last week when you talked about P.J. Washington, but boy, did he improve a ton this year. He upped his scoring from 4 points per game in 2018 and 2019 to 18 points per game in this 2019-2020 season, and is now the focal point of this franchise post-Kemba Walker era. He was snubbed of most improved player, as Brandon Ingram didn't make as big of a jump as Graham did, I don't think. And it will be interesting to see how he meshes with whoever Charlotte drafts. I think they will likely be taking one of Anthony Edwards for LaMelo Ball, who's obviously, a wing who can score. So I'm going to be interested to see how they mesh.
Yeah, I think they're going to take one of those two guys also. There's speculation that they may pass up on him. It could happen. I don't know. I think this draft is it can go a lot of different ways. They may even trade up to one spot because I heard they like James Wiseman a lot, but we'll get into a lot of that later. Looking at Devontae Graham, you're right, Matt. If you're talking about a single player who made that much of a big difference from last year to this past year, it was Devontae Graham. He went from being a guy that no one really even thought of to one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA statistically. And he is an offensive threat. I'm curious to see kind of what his role will be on a winning team. But I think he's a guy that I wouldn't even mind, like, some of these. If Charlotte's willing to trade him, some of these other teams I think got to look at him because he's a really talented player in his own right. I loved him at Kansas. Once Frank Mason left, you saw him. He had the complete reins of the offense and showed how explosive he is on that end, both passing, both getting to the basket, even in the mid-range game, and, of course, that three-point shot. So he's a problem. Reminds me a lot of, like, a younger Lou Williams with that scoring ability and not necessarily not the best size, not the most athletic guy, but he gets the job done and gets you buckets. So I'm glad you brought him up. I'm a big Devontae Graham guy.
Yeah, I'm glad you made the point, too, about possibly being traded. I think he's probably still too young to be traded. I don't think the Hornets will want to give up anything for him yet. They want to see what they have in him. But I do think that they would get a king's ransom for him right now because he is so young and he made such an improvement. And I don't think he's going to plateau off quite yet. I think he's still got some more improvement to do. So I think they would get a lot for him, but I don't think they're going to shop him yet.
Yeah. But last but not least on my list, a guy who this team would definitely get a lot for him if they traded him. But like you just said with Devontae Graham, I don't think they want to. And that is Devin Booker for the Phoenix Suns. And I think he does have something to prove, and here's why. We saw the Suns finally win some games, won 8-0, missed out on the opportunity to make it to the playoffs. Now you got to build off that and finish the job. The Suns got a ton of cap room. They got good draft picks. They got other good young players that complement Booker. Can he prove it this year that he can be the best player on a playoff team? That's what I want to see from him this year.
Yeah, I like that you brought him up because now, like going into the bubble, nobody had expectations for the Suns, and everybody was just like, whoa, Devin Booker is still really good. And the rest of the team started to play well around him. And now there's going to be some expectations in Phoenix this year because of what happened in the bubble. And, as they should. That I think, at this point for the Suns, if you're on that team, you want to have expectations finally. They haven't had expectations since Steve Nash was there. So I think if Devin Booker, you have to relish this moment. You have to relish being looked at as having potential now, as your team having potential and being the guy on that team for a team that has some promising potential. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Matt. Hit it right on the nail. For one, they found their head coach. Monty Williams is definitely the guy there, and that was the completely right hire, and maybe will be a front runner for Coach of the Year next year. Devin Booker, I think he's extremely talented. I'm glad he's one of my favorite players to watch in the NBA. And now you got to see, does that game translate to winning? It did in the bubble, but that was a short stretch. And that's when their backs were on the line. Can they do that for 72 regular season games this year and can they get to the playoffs in a loaded Western Conference? I think that's the biggest answer, and I think they're going to have to make some moves to help Devin Booker out here.
Yeah, we're going to get a little bit about what kind of moves they could possibly make, but it's interesting to me, the Western Conference, they might be a little bit screwed there because the West Conference is so top-heavy with talent, and it's not only top-heavy, but there's a lot of teams in the middle there that are also competing, New Orleans, Memphis, Portland, the teams they were competing with for the 8th seed last year. So I think if they were in the Eastern Conference, they'd probably have a much easier time, but sometimes geography screws you over, but I think they'll definitely be competitive. I think they'll compete for a playoff spot hopefully next year.
Yeah, and Matt, you kind of just hinted at our next segment here, and that's going to be some of the NBA draft rumors we're hearing. There is one really building up right now, apparently, and that is the Phoenix Suns trying to make a move for Chris Paul from the Thunder. And I think adding him, of course, would be you probably form one of the best backcourts in the NBA with him and Devin Booker there. It's a big-time move for a team in the Suns. I'm curious to see what they had to give up. I think as based on the money, they'd have to give up $33 million worth of cap. So that means it's not just going to be picks. Players have to be in this deal. But, Matt, what would you think about a move for Chris Paul to Phoenix?
I think it'd be great. I think, in terms of a deal, I could definitely see a package centered around the 10th pick and Kelly Oubre as the focal point of that deal. But a pairing of Chris Paul and Devin Booker is not one that we anticipated, but man, would that be awesome. I think that move would bring this team over the hump. And, we just talked about how that's a loaded Western Conference there. I think that puts them as a favorite to make the playoffs if they're able to add Chris Paul, because I think that's a great pairing.
I think they're a playoff team if they get Chris Paul, honestly, because I think one thing, and this is what I'm looking at, if this trade doesn't happen, they keep the 10th pick, I think they need to get another guard that can alleviate some of that offense off Devin Booker. Mm-hmm. But also, if he's off the court, can someone else create? I think they're missing that one guy right now. Mm-hmm. And that 10th pick won't be as good as Chris Paul. I will just probably bet all my money on that. Mm-hmm. But I think they have some options there. But anyways, looking at this trade, is it worth it to give up the 10th pick, Kelly Oubre, and I don't know, one of these other guys they have on it?
Maybe.
What'd you say?
Ricky Rubio, maybe.
Ricky Rubio, Dario Saric, one of those guys. Is it worth it? I think so. Especially if you're trying to win now. I think he would do wonders for DeAndre Ayton, who we saw starting to play really well. He's had a very underrated career so far because some of the guys like Luka Doncic and Trae Young got drafted behind him. But he's played really well so far. And while he can create his own offense, I mean, a pick and roll with him would be nice with Chris Paul. It alleviates some of the pressure off Devin Booker. And I think this makes them a playoff team if they make that move.
Absolutely. I think you hit it right in the nail on the head with DeAndre Ayton. I think, DeAndre Ayton loves the pick and roll. And Chris Paul also is great at the pick and roll. He's great at facilitating the ball to the big man, as we saw with the Clippers all those years. Even with the Hornets when they had Delonte West, he was really good at facilitating the ball to him. So I think it's going to be a great pairing if they're able to get that done.
Yeah, I think it'd be a perfect pairing, honestly. And there's some – I think we're going to see some moves in this NBA draft and maybe some big moves. Or maybe not. It could be all smoke. Who knows? But – another team that has been hunting to get somebody to add to this team is the Golden State Warriors. Yes, they have the second overall pick in the draft. But let's not forget 2 years ago, they were in the NBA Finals. And the reason why they had an awful year last year was mainly because of injuries. So Steph Curry's coming back. Klay Thompson is coming back. You expect Draymond Green to be better. Now there's potential that they may make a move with the San Antonio Spurs to get LaMarcus Aldridge and the 11th pick. Do you think this move makes sense?
I think it kind of does. You ask yourself, is LaMarcus Aldridge worth the second pick? I think that depends on what team you are. And I think for the Warriors, I think it makes the most sense of any team in the lottery because they're in win now mode. They would also still be getting a lottery pick back from San Antonio if they got the 11th pick as well. So I think they would still get a decent young player at the 11th pick, and they would get a guy who fits their win now mantra, and it fills a huge position of need as a big man down low. So I think the Warriors should definitely consider it, but I don't know if I would pull the trigger on it, but I think they should definitely deeply consider it.
Yeah, I think both teams should at least, maybe try to work something out here. LaMarcus Aldridge is, waning in his career. He's still a very good player, but he's not a guy who wants to wait on this rebuilding Spurs team that missed the playoffs for the first time in 20 years. And that doesn't really look like they're getting that much better anytime soon. the Golden State Warriors could use an interior scorer like that. They really haven't had one during this run. I guess you'd start him at the 5, but defensively, I don't know if that makes sense. I guess you're asking yourself, is LaMarcus Aldridge and a guy who they can take with that 11th overall pick worth a guy like a James Wiseman or an Anthony Edwards or a guy like that? I guess that's the big question you have to ask. How high are you on those top guys? And I guess how confident do you feel you can strike lightning in a bottle at 11, and then you already have a solid presence there in LaMarcus Aldridge?
Well, I think with the Warriors, too, I think they're confident because they've shown the ability in the past that they can draft well in those mid-tier lottery picks. They obviously got Klay Thompson at, I think, 10th or 11th in the lottery, and they got Steph Curry 7th overall. So I think their opinion on this is that they think that they can thrive in the middle of that lottery if they don't have to have the number 2 pick. And if that's the case, then I would say pull the trigger on this deal.
Yeah, and there's been rumors that the Warriors like a lot of these guys that are going to go later in the lottery potentially. And so that means that they're looking at their options, and they're looking at what can we do. And if you're the Spurs, is there someone worth trading up for? I guess that's also the big question. How confident are you in any of those players? They're all pretty interesting fits with the Spurs, and I don't think any of them really fit what they normally do, being LaMelo Ball, James Wiseman, Anthony Edwards. But at this point, you're probably rebuilding, so I don't think it's a terrible idea to take a shot at one of those guys.
It's definitely not a bad idea to take a shot at one of those guys. The Spurs would target the best player available, I'd imagine. And, in terms of their culture and the way they play, Greg Popovich is probably not going to be there for much longer. So they could probably adopt a new identity based off of who they take with that number 2 pick, whether it's Wiseman, LaMelo Ball, or Anthony Edwards. I think Anthony Edwards would be a great fit, actually. I think, he has all the talent in the world. He's very raw, but getting to learn from Greg Popovich while he's still there is a huge bonus.
Yeah, I think if they were targeting someone, I think Anthony Edwards would be the guy there. Mm-hmm. I agree. I think he is the best fit of those 3 guys, and for a lot of reasons. They have guard depth there. They can wait for him to kind of develop and groom him to be that guy because I think he has the most natural talent in this entire draft.
Absolutely.
But another hot spot for trading is the Hawks at the number 6 pick. Apparently there's a lot of teams trying to go after him. It's a fire sale, if you will. The Timberwolves are looking actually to trade up from number 1. They have the 17th pick in the draft, so they may be looking to make a move for number 6. I'm curious to see who that guy could potentially be. The Boston Celtics have 3 first-round picks, so they may try to package something to trade with the Hawks. But it looks like they want a veteran presence there, and that's why the Pelicans are a little bit intriguing. It looks like they're shopping Drew Holiday, and that could be the center of that pick, which is the number 6 overall pick. I kind of want to know, Matt, what do you think of the Hawks trying to get Drew Holiday, and how would he pair with Trae Young in that current group?
Well, I think he's better than anybody they would get at number 6, to be quite honest with you, especially with their fit right now. I think he fits great with Trae Young, actually. Even though they're both technically point guards, we saw Drew Holiday play a lot of shooting guard this year with New Orleans. And I think they're a great fit, mostly because they would balance each other out in terms of Trae Young being awesome on offense and Drew Holiday being awesome on defense. So I think that alone makes this deal very enticing for Atlanta. I think you have to find a way to pull a trigger on this.
I do. I think you got to work hard here because they got Trae Young. They have John Collins. I think you can afford to give up one of those 3 wing guys in Kevin Huerter, Cam Reddish, or DeAndre Hunter. I'm not sure which one they'd have to give up. I think they have to give up somebody for the Pelicans to be enticed by this. But I think it makes sense for the Pelicans because, I don't know, maybe there's someone they really like there. I'm not quite sure who that guy is. But, again, this is technically a rebuilding team, but with a young core right now willing to get it. And while I'd love to see Drew Holiday still there, I understand that this team is looking long-term still, and maybe this is a trade that makes sense for both parties.
Yeah, I think Cam Reddish went to Duke, right?
Yes.
I think that'd be an interesting pair, and I think the Pelicans might be interested in looking at Cam Reddish and maybe Kevin Huerter as well to pair with Zion and Nola because, obviously the Reddish and Zion connection there. They played that 1 year together at Duke. So I think that if they were going to get anybody from Atlanta, I think Cam Reddish would probably be one of the guys too.
And I think if you're the Hawks, that's the one I don't want to trade because I think he's the best of the 3. Mm-hmm. But we'll see how desperate they are to get Drew Holiday. I agree. I think him and Trae Young would be an awesome pairing. But let's look at your team right now. The 76ers, there's speculation that they're trying to package Al Horford and the 21st pick to get Buddy Hield from the Sacramento Kings. However, though, Matt, I'm going to keep it real with you. I don't think that's going to be enough. What else would the Sixers have to package to get that to happen?
Man, this is exactly – oh, my God. The Kings are trying to tank right now. They have openly said this already. They're like, I want to tank. I'm like, perfect. Boy, do I have the guy that's going to get you to the salary cap requirements for you. You got big old Al Horford making $109 million a year. He's perfect for you. He's got championship pedigree, Hunter. I would gladly package him and Josh Richardson in a deal with for Buddy Hield. I'll give him the 21st pick too. Take whatever you want as long as you're taking Al Horford, okay? Leave Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid for me. Take Al Horford and whoever you want, literally anybody you want, and give me Buddy Hield, and I'll be okay with that.
Man, all those nice things you said about Al Horford, but as soon as Buddy Hield comes in the picture, you throw it away.
Hunter, my fingers are crossed that whole time I was doing that.
Yeah, I'm sure they were, Matt. I'm sure they were. Ball don't lie. But, yeah, I mean, this trade makes a ton of sense for the Sixers, not so much for the Kings. I mean, Buddy Hield's mad there, but I don't know why you'd want to take on Al Horford's contract.
Because they want to tank. They know how bad he would make them, Hunter. They want the first pick next year.
Yeah, yes. I guess so. And I don't know. I mean, De'Aaron Fox is up for a contract extension. If he sees that this team's openly tanking like that, I don't know. I don't think you want to, burn too many bridges there for Sacramento. I'm just saying.
Hunter, they want that. They want to get rid of everybody. Just take Al Horford.
Oh my God! Yeah, build a team around Al Horford. That's what.
Amen.
That's what the Kings fans want.
He's got championship pedigree, Hunter.
What championships has he won, Matt?
The NCAA championships in 2006 and 2007.
All right, that was almost 15 years ago. All right, well, he's a good player. I don't think it's worth it, though, for the Kings. But anyways, though, still no clear number one pick in this draft. Everyone has their own opinions, but there's no consensus guy, and it still seems like we have no idea how the top of this draft's going to work. I mean, Matt, when was the last time we've seen something like this? I mean, this is crazy. I have no idea, and I follow this stuff pretty closely.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the last time I didn't know a first pick coming into it in any big draft. NFL, NBA, even MLB and NHL, they've all been pretty predictable first overall picks. And this year, for the first time in what seems like forever in any of the four major sports, there's not a first clear guy. But I do think a clear name will begin to emerge this week of the draft. Not a lot of clear-cut generational talent in this draft per se, but a lot of depth, in my opinion. So I do think a name will emerge, but I don't think it'll be until a few days before the draft.
Yeah, I guess that's the key here. The only other time I remember like just having no idea was in 2013 when the Cavs took Anthony Bennett. I think that was probably the biggest draft shock that I've ever seen. Maybe Cam Johnson going to the Suns was up there too, but at least that was the 11th pick. At the first overall pick, you took Anthony Bennett. Mm-hmm. Literally no mock draft had that. Like, not one. Everyone was like, why did you just do that? And it didn't pay off for them either. I mean, maybe it did. They traded him for Kevin Love, so it wasn't their problem. But literally David Griffin knew the second he stepped on the court for Summer League that they messed up. He knew right away this guy's a bust.
I mean, I think their thinking was, oh, my God, he's Canadian. He's got to be good, right? Canadians are the next wave of basketball players. Boy, were they wrong. Poor Cavs. Poor Cleveland.
Oh, boy. Yeah, they were quite wrong there. But, yeah, we have some interesting things here. For one, James Wiseman. There is some reports, quote, emerging that he's going to go number one to the Timberwolves. That could be smoke because the Timberwolves may try to entice him so someone trades up and takes him because they know the Warriors may very well take him at number two. May try to, bait some teams into that. But if this is true and James Wiseman goes number one to Minnesota, how do you think this pairing would be with him and Karl-Anthony Towns in the front court?
It's a truly awful, terrible fit. I couldn't think of a worse fit for Wiseman to come into a rookie situation with no summer league, no G League, no training camp. It's the worst possible scenario for Wiseman. And like you said, Hunter, I'm not even going to entertain this conversation too much because I think it just seems to me like the Wolves are trying to keep everyone around them on their toes and not make it obvious who their guy is right now. So they're just going to be connected to everyone so that nobody has their idea.
I think you're absolutely right, Matt. I think this is all smoke, and the Timberwolves are trying to use it in their favor.
Mhm.
Whether it's working or not, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, it's just like there's no way they would do that. Like that fit makes absolutely no sense in today's modern game. Both of them are not that great on defense,
Yep.
and they're both not super like mobile, agile. Like it just makes no sense.
Yep.
It is a ridiculous rumor, but you never know. Maybe I'm wrong, and the Timberwolves surprise me. But also too, another interesting one. The Pistons are working out LaMelo Ball. And the reason why I say that is because the Pistons have the 7th overall pick in the draft. There's no way, even if LaMelo slips, there's no way he falls that far to 7. So, do we see the Pistons maybe makes a move for him and take him number 1?
So here's my thinking, Hunter. Maybe we see the Pistons trade up to number 2 with Golden State and possibly include Blake Griffin in a deal? Or is that too weird? Am I getting too weird with that?
Do you want his contract though? Like,
I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying in terms of weirdness. Maybe you give up Andrew Wiggins too because nobody really wants him anyway. So I think that's a lot of money. But I do think, if the Warriors are going to make that deal, they're going to want somebody good from Detroit. And who does Detroit have other than Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose?
maybe it's Derrick Rose. I don't know. But
They already got like 18 guards on that team. They don't need another one.
yeah, I think well, Christian Wood would have been interesting, but he's a free agent, so they don't really even have his rights right now. I mean, Luke Kennard could potentially be someone you just throw in there. I don't really think it makes sense for the Warriors necessarily to do it unless they include like Derrick Rose in there.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a difference between number 2 and number 7. But unless there's someone that the Warriors absolutely love, that they feel completely confident that they can get at that 7th overall pick, and maybe that is the case, I don't see why you would trade 5 picks back in the draft.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But I was, food for thought. It's fun. It's fun to fantasize.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather just take a guy that even if I'm reaching early, if I really think he's going to be that guy, than to trade back and then lose the risk of losing him. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that's a common draft philosophy. Even if it doesn't look good on paper, they did it last year with Jordan Poole. I still don't think it was a good pick, but yeah, he went a lot earlier than people thought in the first round. A lot of people didn't even think he would potentially get drafted. So, but they did it anyway. So I guess I respect the philosophy. But last but not least here, we're going to talk about another big-time name, Anthony Edwards. We talked about him a bit, but apparently a lot of people thought he had a very disappointing pro day. And I just want to know, Matt, how much stock do you put into this? And do you think that maybe teams already have their mind made up and this didn't even matter?
I'm honestly not even sure how much stock goes into a pro day for NBA teams. I think they put more value into live situation and game tape, much like the NFL does. Because at the end of the day, they're playing against air. It's not super competitive. They're going against air, or if they're playing against other guys, they're not playing against anybody that's necessarily good. So I think pro days are they're not important. I think it's just all smoke and mirrors. Really, it's just another excuse for teams to get up close and personal with them, ask me a few questions. Pro days, I think they're extreme. They're the most overrated part of the draft process, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think the one thing I think is interesting is how bad do they think he played?
Right.
I think that could make a difference. Like, if they think he looked like absolutely terrible and we haven't seen this guy play since March, then I'm a little concerned. Like, is he out of shape? Did he look like I think you can play phenomenal and people will be like, oh, that's nice. But if you play that bad, because I've seen in some drafts that guys play that bad and it does affect their stock because it's like, God, you looked absolutely terrible out there. You didn't even look like you belonged out there.
Mm-hmm.
So if they think Anthony Edwards looked that bad, then maybe that's a bit of a concern, especially given how long it's been since we've seen these guys play. But if it was just like, he was off that day, I don't know if it makes much of a difference.
And that's the other thing, too, with pro days is that it's one day. So maybe he is having an off day. Maybe he's having a bad day, like you said, where it's like noticeable that he's put on 25 pounds and then he doesn't have muscle. Maybe that's a whole different story. But I think people would know that before going into the pro day anyway. And that's why I don't put too much stock in this, because somebody could just have a bad day. It happens all the time in sports. Somebody could have a bad game, number 47 in the regular season. It doesn't mean they're a bad player.
Yeah, I think people that don't like Anthony Edwards are just going to use this as an excuse not to draft him.
Exactly.
And I think that people that like him are just going to overlook and be like, well, I'm just going to trust the tape and what my eyes have seen for this elongated period of time that we have with him. But, yeah, I think it's interesting. We'll see. But But I also want to know too. We talked about maybe the Spurs being a team that if they traded with Golden State, they would take him in the draft. But do you think there's any teams out there that would potentially make a move for Anthony Edwards if he happens to slip in the draft?
I could see San Antonio, Detroit maybe. But of the consensus top three guys, him, LaMelo Ball, and James Wiseman, I think that he is the guy with the most potential to slip back. And if that's the case, I would definitely be aware of a team trading up for him because they realize, oh my God, he's still available. I think I love Detroit fit for him. I love the Spurs, as we talked about, fit for him. I also like him fitting with the Knicks if they want to move up a couple spots for him.
Okay.
I think any of those guys would be fantastically amused to have him.
Yeah, I think the Wizards could be interesting if they're looking long term here and looking to see like if we're not gonna have Wall and Beal, can we build around somebody else? And you can swing for the fences for Edwards there too. But we'll see what happens. I think this NBA draft is gonna be fun to watch because I just don't know what's gonna happen. I'm making my mock draft for Sports Night next week, and I can't wait for all those picks to be wrong. But last but not least, like we always do, giving our all NBA teams this week, all NBA bounce back teams. So we're going to each give 5 players that we think is going to have a bounce back season, going to improve on maybe what they did last year, maybe not so good, or maybe they had misfortunes, whatever the case may be. So Matt, who do you have first on your list?
He is probably the most obvious guy. I think he's the biggest star of the group that needs a bounce back season. It's not necessarily bounce back because of what he didn't do. It's just the fact that he wasn't on the court. That is Steph Curry. He missed so much time last year and mostly played meaningless basketball for a team that was god-awful without him and the rest of their stars. It seems like people have kind of forgotten about him a little bit when people start, talking about the best guards in the league. And I think he makes an all-NBA team this year and gets the Dubs back to the playoffs. I think, people got to start putting more respect on him. He missed 1 year. Let's not forget how good he was.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more because he's also on my list for a lot of those reasons you just mentioned. I think Steph Curry is going to be on a revenge tour. I wouldn't be shocked. Little bold prediction, he leads the league in scoring perhaps and just tries to go on a rampage and make people remember who he is. People underestimate how competitive Steph Curry is and how much tunnel vision the guy has. I mean, he's one of the most competitive players in the NBA. He'll do whatever it takes to win. That's why he's won a lot of different things in this league, why he's the greatest shooter of all time, why he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. In my opinion, the second best point guard to ever play, behind Magic Johnson, of course. But I'm excited to see what he does this year because I think he's going to be on a revenge tour quite a bit. So, Matt, I'll let you go ahead again since Steph Curry was also on my list. Who was number 2 for you?
All right, I hope this guy's not on your list. It's Eric Gordon. He only played half of the regular season games last year. He only played 36 out of 72. And even when he played, he wasn't his normal self. He only shot 32% from 3 in the playoffs, extremely uncharacteristic of him. We talked about Houston a lot in the beginning of this podcast, but I think if Houston wants to bounce back themselves, they need Gordon to do so as well.
That's a really interesting name to bring up, and I'm glad you did because he didn't have a great year last year. Let's not forget he was a former 6th Man of the Year winner for Houston. He had a couple good games in the playoffs. I remember Game 7 and Game 6, I think, against OKC. He played really well because Harden really struggled. Westbrook really struggled. But him and Robert Covington, all those other guys kind of filled in and picked up the slack, and he was leading the charge there. A true X factor on that team because he can really score in bunches, can score in a lot of different ways, and is kind of like a flamethrower. That's a bit of a mouthful speaking fast because he can heat up in a hurry. And I really like that pick. I did not have him on my list, so I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just doing God's work.
Doing God's work. Next on my list here, you may have, I'm not sure, John Wall for the Washington Wizards. This guy, we have not seen him play in quite some time. And he is sounding really confident in himself. He says that I'm going to come back better than I was. And let's not forget, John Wall, arguably the best two-way guard in the NBA, gets it done on both ends of the court. One of the most gifted players I've seen coming into the league in quite some time. He is one of the best passers in the league. His jump shot's not great. Maybe he was able to work on it a bit. One of the most athletic players I've seen. One of the fastest players I've seen play basketball. He has all the natural talent in the world. And if he's able to really be that guy again, and we've seen how Bradley Beal's emerged, maybe the Wizards can make the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't know about playoffs, but maybe sneaking around that 8 seed a little bit there. I just don't see them being anything better than that because the rest of the roster isn't that great outside of him and Beal. It's very young, very unproven. But John Wall is an interesting name to bring up because Obviously he's been riddled with injuries the last 2 years. Tore his Achilles in his own home. That was pretty funny. Achilles injuries are bad too because it's hard to come back from that and have the same explosiveness that you once did. We saw it with DeMarcus Cousins. We've seen, what all the leg injuries did to obviously D Rose as well. So I think I'm very interested to see John Wall play this year.
Yeah, I think he's gonna prove some people wrong. He's gonna be doing this again. But to the John Wall. But I got him on that. All right, so that's number 2 on my
I haven't seen somebody do that in like 8 years, dude. That was crazy. Remember the song? There was a song about.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
Dude, that is the most cringy song ever. Oh my God, I've not seen anybody do that in forever.
And you gotta bring it back, back to his roots at Kentucky. But Matt, who is number 3 on your list here? It's not John Wall.
I have no idea. Mike Conley. He played just 47 of 72 regular season games for the Jazz and wasn't particularly good even when he did play in the regular season. He played much better in the playoffs, however, as he averaged 20 points per game on about 48% shooting, which is encouraging, but saw his disappointing season end on a sour note when his would-have-been game winner in Game 7 rimmed out in the most painful way possible. I feel you, Mike Conley. I know pain about Game 7 shots. Kawhi Leonard, you still haunt my dreams. Mike Conley, I understand. I hope you bounce back, buddy.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I get it. But Mike Conley is also on my list, Matt. So we're 2 for 3 so far. And for a lot of the reasons you brought up, his fit with the Jazz was pretty rough last year. Yep. Seems to kind of start to get it back together though in the playoffs a little bit. And in the bubble, he played a lot better. Maybe it's because he was healthy. Maybe he just kind of figured out the X's and O's a little more. But he's a true leader. He's a guy who I think will be a head coach one day in the NBA or an assistant because he's really smart, understands the game. He understood Donovan Mitchell. I don't want to get in his way, but I got to be ready myself. I'm assuming he's going to opt into his contract because he's getting paid a lot of money. Was once at one point the highest paid player in NBA history. Oh, my God. But Mike Conley is a pretty good player, a guy who's been a borderline all-star, an all-NBA defensive player. If he can kind of pick it back up, they obviously going to get Bojan Bogdanovic back. They got Rudy Gobert there, one of the best defensive players, one of the best rim protectors. I think the Jazz can build off that sour, 3-1 lead they blew and be a threat in the West next year.
I think so too, Hunter. I think they're going to always be around in, that 4, 5, 6 range in the Western Conference. I think they'll always be a very competitive team as long as Donovan Mitchell is there. And with Mike Conley in terms of playing well in the playoffs last year, he had to miss games 1 and 2 because of the birth of his son. So he had to come back in the bubble and quarantine. So, don't ever underestimate dad's strength there, Hunter.
Dad strength. Never underestimate dad's strength. All right, but that was my 3rd player on my list. But I'll go with my 4th player here. I don't think you're going to have him. I'd be shocked if you did. But Marvin Bagley for the Sacramento Kings. Yeah, I didn't think you did. Let's not forget, he was first-team all-rookie his rookie year and really came along really well during the end of that season. Was hurt pretty much all of last year, kept battling injuries. But him and De'Aaron Fox, probably one of the fastest guard-forward combos in the NBA. Their games complement each other really nicely. The Kings need somebody to do something on that team outside of De'Aaron Fox, especially if they trade Buddy Hield. I think Marvin Bagley, a gifted offensive player, he's a gifted rebounder, and has shown flashes that he can even do a little bit on the outside as well. I think people are sleeping on him a bit and forgetting how talented he is, and I think he can definitely have a bounce-back season for the Kings.
Yeah, I would sure hope so if you're Sacramento, or else he's just another failed lottery pick for the Kings, which just seems like an NBA draft tradition at this point. Bagley's coming into his draft, I thought he was a bit overrated. I thought he probably wasn't as good as scouts made him out to be. I think it was just, the Duke thing and being the star of the Duke team that people was like, oh my God, he's really good. And, he was very good, but playing in Sacramento, it's like going to the Cleveland Browns, the NFL. It's like where careers go to die. So I hope he turns his career around, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. Again, the Kings don't really have their stuff together, and sometimes careers go and die, and your career is very important based on where you land equally to how good you are. But Marvin Bagley did show flashes his rookie year, had the injury bug his second year, and I think he has a chance to kind of remind people how talented he is and put up those numbers offensively. But Matt, who else made your list here?
Real quick, one more thing about the Kings. I'll never forgive them for what they did to my boy Jimmer. All right.
Be anything.
All right. The fourth player on my list is another Warriors player. I have Draymond Green. We talked about him a little bit last week. Another guy we talked about a little bit last week. But I think he will be much better when he's surrounded by Steph and Clay again. And he could be the clear third option. He may even slide to the fourth scoring option with Wiggins there if they hold on to him this offseason. And then depending on what the Warriors do with the second pick, he could become the fourth option. But I'm still looking for Draymond Green to really improve off the crapshoot he had last year. He was like the only guy out there. The clear number one option, it was not good. Very ugly, very disgusting basketball. I don't like Draymond Green as a player, and I think he's a terrible analyst when he goes on NBA TNT. But I'm cautiously. I've said that a lot this podcast, but I'm very.
That's the phrase.
Yeah, call this podcast the cautiously optimistic podcast. I am optimistic that he will get back to the way he was when they were winning championships.
I think cautiously optimistic is maybe like the most neutral phrase you can possibly say. Like, I'm cautiously – like, you're trying to be nice, but you really don't know. Save me your chest, Matt. But, yeah, Draymond Green, we've talked about him a lot, and we've talked about the Warriors a lot here on this podcast as a team that could potentially bounce back and a player that could potentially bounce back. But last but not least on my list, it pains me to say it, I don't like him very much. I think he talks way too much for what he's actually done in his NBA career. He's really, really talented, and I have to give him credit, and that's Paul George. I think that let's not forget, he was literally a finalist for MVP with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He had surgery on both of his shoulders and missed the beginning of all training camp, all preseason with the Clippers. Never really seemed to get his footing back. Playoff P was pandemic P in the playoffs and in the bubble. He was really, really bad and definitely disappointed a lot of Clipper fans that gave up all these picks to get him. But at the same time, though, I can't forget he's one of the best two-way players in the league. And if the Clippers have a chance to go for it again and go for a title, he has to be that guy. Maybe he is this year.
Yeah, in the bubble, it was pretty clear that he just was not himself. You know, his shooting was off, obviously. But the most notable thing to me that was really concerning for me was his defense was off. He wasn't the same, great stout defender that he's been known to be over his NBA career in the bubble. And maybe, that's because of what he came out and said about him, not having great mental health in the bubble, being away from his family, being isolated, just only doing basketball. That can weigh a lot on somebody. It can really affect your game as well. So maybe I'm looking for him to, bounce back. Maybe Paul George is your Russell Westbrook in terms for me in comparison to what our hatreds.
I don't hate Paul George. I don't know. I just think he's a little dramatic. I think it's he's just he makes he freaking goes on stage with Nas and Russell Westbrook to say he's staying with the Thunder. Then he asks for a trade the next year. And then he makes up all these excuses why the Clippers didn't do anything and how he named himself Playoff P, even though he didn't win a freaking playoff series since 2014 with the Pacers. What's this all about? Please stop. Of course, then burn the Lakers. So that I'm not gonna lie, a little upset there.
Oh, that's what it is.
You can have Paul George. That's fine. We have LeBron and
Hunter, you've made yourself very clear. That's what it's about. Because he said he wanted to go to the Lakers, and then he went to the Clippers. That's what's. Oh no, I get it, Hunter. I get it.
Look, all right, we don't need him because we want.
Oh yeah.
He didn't. Okay.
I get it.
I don't want to hear it. I'm over it at this point. He's a little dramatic, and we'll beat him rather than him joining us. But hey, maybe Paul George will ask for a trade to the Lakers. It seems like every year he wants to play for a new team. Just saying. But anyways, though, Matt, you have one more player on your list.
I do.
Who is that guy?
It's a guy we've talked about a lot over the past few weeks. It's Victor Oladipo. And I think he needs a fresh start, where he's not expected to be the guy on a team. And it's something we've said on this podcast where I just don't think he's the main guy on a team anymore. I think he's a solid second or third option. But I think if he's the main guy on a team going forward, that team's not going to be very competitive just because I haven't seen anything since his injury. You know, he was very good with Indiana before he got injured. Then he tore his quad, and he just hasn't really been the same ever since he came back from those injuries. He got injured again in the bubble. He was kind of off and on in the bubble. You know, I need to see more consistency out of him. I want him to bounce back because he's a very fun player to watch. He's a very underrated defender, in my opinion. Very quick guy, can get to the cup, can shoot a couple threes. And people forget, you know, he was very competitive in that Eastern Conference quarterfinal series with LeBron. He went to toe-to-toe with him that final year LeBron was with the Cavs. And he was really fun to watch. So I'm looking for him to get back to where he was in terms of that, but maybe not as the first guy on the team.
I'm just curious, Matt. My audio went out for a while. You did say Malcolm Brogdon, right?
No, Victor Oladipo.
Victor Oladipo. All right, there's some other players. Yeah, literally, for your first 10, 15 seconds, I was hoping you were going to say his name again. You didn't. But yeah, I did hear enough analysis there. Victor Oladipo, of course, was not good in the bubble. He may get traded. He obviously was recovering from that injury. So very curious to see where he plays next year and how well he plays. So we've talked about him a lot here. We talked about some teams. If you look at some of our earlier podcasts, who could potentially make a move for Victor Oladipo. But again, he obviously broke out with the Pacers, and maybe he can maybe a new team will potentially have him break out yet again.
Hope so for his sake.
Yeah, but it's going to wrap it up here on Ball Don't Lie. Again, next week we're going to give some more draft coverage. The draft is actually going to be a week from today. This is being recorded on a Wednesday, on Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to all those who've served the country and things like that. But that's going to wrap it up here. Thank you for listening. It's going to be a busy off season, and a quick off season. Everything's going to come in a hurry. And we'll be here to cover it all here on Ball Don't Lie.
Adios.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.